Hello, welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage. As you can see by the thumbnail, I hauled home another trunk load of junk. Up at 5 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Down to southern New Hampshire. Took me 2 hours. By 7 a.m. I'm standing in a 40-foot storage container looking at what I intended to go there for, which is a Nash 5-speed with a Hurst inline shifter. More on that when we dig it out of the trunk. A friend of mine had saw it at the swap meet in the fall, and it's taken me this long to drag it home. But it's here. While in the storage container, there was 2 Turbo 400s, and I just made a package deal, and the guy said, well, how are you gonna get them home? I said, how I always get them home. Put them in the trunk of the car. And both transmissions have torque converters. He's like, how are you gonna get them out? I said, that's the hard part. So my engine crane, Harbor Freight, is the second one I've had in my lifetime. First one was, I bought it at a yard sale. It had its quirks. I've had things as heavy as a 5.9 Cummins on it. It was on 3 wheels most of the time. You had to stand on the left rear of it so it wouldn't tip over, but I was used to it. And the space it took up, we got along pretty good. Until one day, just a few years ago, a guy I was helping out with an engine was gonna go buy a new engine crane, but it was a holiday. For whatever reason, he didn't wanna get down and do it, so I let him take mine. He said, why don't I just buy this one and you go buy a new one? And I wanted one with the legs flipped up for storage, you know, take up less space. So that's where we're at. However, I could spend some time shimming the small wheels on the front, but in its current condition, when you flip the legs down and try to put the pins in, you can only get one in. The other one misses by quite a bit. So I have to go get a floor jack or try to pick up on it and shove the pin in at the same time, but it's not that light. It's just annoying having to go get a floor jack or some way to get the pin in and out. It doesn't come out any easier without hammering it out because the whole weight of the engine crane is on it. So today, I'm gonna take some scrap I found under the bench and fix it. There's the 2 bolts that you see under the ram down below. I'm just gonna make a plate, put a bolt in the middle, use some of this threaded rod, and this is no ordinary threaded rod. This is what's left over after you cut off an air brake chamber on a big truck. I mean, this isn't your hardware store ready rod. This will stop a 80,000 pound plus semi, so without bending. Way overkill, and it also occurs to me that this is all I have left. Out of all the years of working on big trucks, you have to cut this to fit your brake application. They come extra long. So I'm gonna have to hook up with my buddies that still work on big trucks and get some more because I use it for building stuff. The piece of flat bar, I can tell by the marking on it. It reminds me of a beautiful spring day where another buddy and myself bought a dumpster full of steel and split it. It was a lot of work, but it was a nice day. And dragged it home, and it's been clogging my garage up ever since, but I make stuff out of it and have been since I dragged it home. So I'll cut a piece of that out, have to drill 3 holes in it, and then the 5/8 fine thread or rusty nuts will be, well, it'll be easy to show you. Why do I use rusty nuts? Well, the fact that they're rusty means there's no coating on them, so I'm not gonna get sick breathing the smoke from welding a nut or a bolt that's coated. So I'll just wire wheel the rust off and we'll slip it together. So let me build it. I don't think you wanna watch me cutting and grinding, but I'll show you the end result, and then we're gonna have to get that stuff out of the trunk. Part of me wants to just go ahead and use the floor jack and not fix the engine crane, but if I don't do it now, when am I gonna do it? And Stuff like this is always rewarding. Every time you use it in the future, you realize you took the time to make it easier on yourself, and that's not a bad thing. Better look at what I'm doing. I cut the piece of plate. I've got it all laid out to drill the holes. I just went underneath the engine crane with a piece of cardboard and tapped up with a hammer, so I knew where my holes are gonna be. And I could transfer that onto the plate. And one nut is gonna be welded here. It'll be outboard of the engine crane. I'll drill them all to 1/2 inch and then enlarge the one that's gonna get the stud to 5/8. And I'm gonna weld one nut where it's gonna touch the floor, one nut to the plate, and then when I thread it up through, I'll weld the other nut on top. So it's captive, and simple matter of just bolting it on after I paint it. And just like that, we'll weld it up. It's hot. I need to give it a final polish. I think I'll grind this nut where it hits the ground flat. Why not, right? And give it a paint job while I go eat lunch and come back and slap it on. But yeah, it came out pretty good. I ended up, instead of trusting the mark I had put on my argon regulator when the tank was fuller, that was 25 CFH, but turns out it was only about 18 now, so I had to open her up a little more, and everything went pretty good. I hit a little bit of something on one of the nuts, probably the gold stuff or some of the rust I didn't get off in the threads, but all in all, it came out pretty good. Next step, bolt it on. Well, that's the concept anyway. I actually have the wheels completely off the ground. Makes the pins really easy to put in and out. Before I had to jack it up quite high. There's over an inch under the small wheels in the front. It's almost as if the front wheels aren't correct. Maybe I put it together backwards. I don't know. No, I think the big ones go in the back. They match the front ones, and these were just never right. I just gun them up and down. I thought about a T-handle, but you can see how close it is to the engine crane itself. I didn't want to make it weak by sticking it out far enough to have a T-handle, and it's far easier with the impact. So at least now it's self-contained, and all I have to do is come up with a wrench or a socket. This Turbo 400 was in the container. It's marked 400 Turbo Shift Kit Stall Converter. It does seem to have what I would guess is a B&M super hole shot, if it's period correct. The transmission is a 1972 CJ code. He thought it was out of a 396 Chevelle SS. It's actually out of a C10, C20, or C30 with a 396, so he had the 396 part right. It is super clean. Obviously been painted a long time ago. Curious to see what I'll find inside, but as we know, it's a premium transmission. I paid a below premium price, buying in bulk, you know, but the downside of that is, as I've mentioned before, nobody drains anything. So this thing is right full of oil. It didn't have a yoke. I wasn't going to buy any Turbo 400s. I guess I should travel with my kit. You know, a plug for the dipstick and a yoke and any other holes that I might need to plug. The Doug Nash 5-speed, from the 2 or 3 poor quality pitches that I had, I knew it had a yoke sticking out of the back of it, so there was little danger of that leaking. Plus, I always line the trunk of my Honda with at least 2 layers of cardboard. If I can get a big box, I cut it up into big squares, and it's super useful. And I keep a couple in my trunk, and one of them had advertisement on it, so it was shiny. And fortunately, when the oil leaked out of this and the 375, which we'll get to next, it never got down to my trunk mat. So I wasted a couple pieces of cardboard, but small price to pay. The TH375 that I brought home today is allegedly out of a 1990 SS 454 truck. The metal tag is missing, so I can't confirm that, but I do recognize the GMT 400, which is that series of truck. Shift linkage bracket, And it has an electronic speedometer, which is pretty rare these days. And of course it has a flat platypus tail housing and a TH350 yoke, 27 spline. The oil in this is nice and red, appears to be in good shape. A good score. I can't believe I have another TH375, but it'll be interesting to see if I could remove the tone ring and put it on a short shaft 400. I don't know. I haven't even done any research on that to see if it could happen. I'm sure with enough time, luck, money, and parts, you can do anything. And now, the main event. The reason I got up at dark 30 to waste 4 or 5 hours of my life and question my ability to function in society. This is a Doug Nash 5-speed. If you follow along the 56 210 Handyman wagon, I have mocked up a Doug Nash 4+1 5-speed, which looks exactly like this. Doug Nash was an aftermarket company that eventually made transmissions for Corvettes called the 4+3. Do not cross these two. The 4+3 was not, well, let's just say it didn't have the greatest reputation. And Doug Nash eventually was bought out by Richmond. And I believe, well, they still sell the 4+1, or they just call it the Richmond 5-speed. At this point, it's a street transmission with synchros. And I believe Liberty Performance or Liberty Gears still sells parts for these. And I guess I'm going to find out. Now, I only saw pictures of it. The guy swore it came out of a Chevy. The pictures didn't really show me the input shaft. I know that in a lot of Chevy applications, when they ran these, they had an 18 spline Mopar clutch. That was pretty normal. And probably a Mopar yoke. It's not turbo 400. My 4+1 5-speed in the 56 210 Handyman wagon has a traditional GM 26 spline input and turbo 400 output. But it looks just like this. The way you can tell them apart that this is a straight cut gears. It's probably pro shifted. I'd prefer if it was face plated. I know if it's been serviced or upgraded, it could be face plated, but there's only one way to find out. But externally, well, while you're looking at this direction, it does have a Hurst version of the Mr. Gasket inline shifter. And this transmission is a 1984. I didn't know they were still making these, but it could be leftover, new old stock. Who knows how they were married up together? I don't even know if you can see my face. So it does have the shifter. It needs some work, but I know a guy that works on shifters, so that's not a problem. That's me, by the way. So I can probably resurrect that. It does have at least half the stop kit, because that's important. But externally, if you're shopping, if you're foolish enough to want to buy one of these, and I'll tell you why you're foolish. The street transmission says 4+1 back here, but it doesn't have this big knot right here. This indicates it's a drag race transmission, no synchros, straight cut gears, and you want a later one that has this Allen bolt right here because it's an extra bearing, because they had a problem with flex in the shafts. So let's go over the positives of this transmission. It's pro shifted, it's a crash box. You can really bang gears with it. When you lay it over like this, take the tail housing off, take the bearing retainer off, take this row of bolts out, the whole thing splits in half. And everything is serviceable with snap rings. It's probably the world's easiest transmission to fix. If you follow like Mike Finnegan on Drag Week, he had to put a first gear in it between rounds, and he actually got it back together with the wrong ratio and everything. And then in further episodes, he had one of the levers upside down, and he had first and second backwards. Would have had to be this one, and end up blowing up the Hemi he has. But anyway, enough about him. Back to the transmission. It is a waste of time in a lot of ways, because while they're stronger than the transmissions available back in the day, it's not as strong as, for instance, like the Rankin T10 that I just brought home, which is a road race face-plated transmission. That is a nice unit, but that was considerably more expensive. I didn't pay what I consider too much money for this. I passed up a few deals for, more than this, but a friend of mine asked me what I'm going to put it in. I said, the garage. Because I currently don't even have anything I could probably even use it in. Now I am mocking up my 56 210 wagon. The drive shaft to be the correct length. I'd have to swap the yoke. And now that I showed up this morning just to buy this transmission. I had not seen any good pictures of it other than from a distance. First thing I notice is the bearing retainer is not there. And this is 18 spline Mopai, that's fine, but somebody butchered, and I mean butchered, the pilot bushing area. So bearing retainer, no big deal. Now I gotta get an input shaft. And again, this is pro shifted, and the gears are probably still serviced by Liberty, but I was gonna take it apart anyway. I've had one of these apart in the 80s. Mutual friend of mine told me because I was breaking a lot of Muncies, he says, I have a Doug Nash race transmission. You can use it, but it needs to be fixed. So I took it apart. His was straight Mopai length. The input shaft was a Mopai length and everything. So even back in the 80s, I couldn't afford to buy parts to fix it. But I actually had it all apart and put it all back together. So I've done it once before, and I have very little memory of it, except I was in the back room of my parents' garage, which is where nightly my friends and I would gather to work on my stuff. Good times back there. But anyway, so I don't know what the ratios are. Typically, these had a relatively low first gear. Now, the 4+1 in the 56 wagon, I've explained it before. They call it that. It's not an overdrive. It has a really low first gear, 320-ish. And you combine that with a 270 to 3.0 rear gear, and it's poor man's overdrive. This is the street transmission. Now, the race transmission, you could probably have different first gear ratios. Most of these were behind screaming small blocks and, modified production and stuff like that. So, it's had a hard life. It's definitely stronger than some. Probably not on par with my Rankin T10. And no sense complaining about it. I own it now, and it's going to be an adventure. And that's that. So somebody went crazy with black paint. In one way, it probably preserved it. Maybe it saved the chrome and stuff. It's got the old black textured T-handle. So it's cool. It's junk. Can't wait to pop the cover. I see the shift is really not functioning, but it feels pretty smooth. So we'll play with it another day. But thanks for following along this whole journey. I paused for a long lunch while my paint was drying on my little engine crane adaptation, but I'm going to go take it easy, I think. I've been lifting transmissions all day long. I had to carry them out of that container across the ice into the trunk of the Honda. And here I did use the engine crane to get them out. Spilled some oil, had to clean up some oil in my driveway. Yeah, and if you see me, which you did when I was showing you the Turbo 400s and the 375, I ran out of my furniture dollies that I buy at Harbor Freight for $7 to $10 a piece. So I had some wheel dollies for a car to push around in the garage. The wheels on those, when I put my hand underneath to assist it over the threshold of the door, your hand will fit right in the middle of it. So now I'll probably have a black fingernail to go along with it. So memories. So have a good evening. Talk to you soon.